Hi, I'm Gordon from Camera Labs, and this is my first looks review of the Canon RF 45mm f1.2 STM, a bright aperture standard prime lens for their EOS R mirrorless cameras. Note, it is not compatible with older EF DSLRs. Announced in November 2025 and costing just £480, dollar and current pricing and description, it's a pretty unique combination of focal length and aperture at a fairly affordable price. Sure, I know Olympus has a 45 1.2, but that's for the smaller micro four thirds format, whereas the new Canon is a full frame lens, giving you a taste of the exotic without breaking the bank. In terms of price, size, quality and positioning, it slots between the budget RF 51.8 and the high-end 51.4L and 51.2L, although obviously it's much closer to the former model. And in that respect, it's kind of a similar proposition to the old EF 51.4 and represents a much more affordable step up over the 1.8 STM than the 1.4L VCM. God, that's a lot of letters, isn't it? I also like that they haven't gone for another 50. The 45mm focal length is close enough to 50 to be considered standard and a great general purpose option, but I personally prefer its slightly wider coverage. Meanwhile, the f1.2 aperture has the potential for very shallow depth of field effects. Of course, as a budget lens, no one should expect the 45 1.2 to come anywhere near the 50 1.4L or 1.2L in terms of build or optical quality, but it is a world apart in heft and price, so the question is, what will it give you in practice? I had a chance to try out a pre-production sample for this video, and I'm going to show you around it along with sharing some images so far to demonstrate the sharpness, the bokeh and the focusing. Here's the new lens mounted on the equally new EOS R6 III body launched alongside it, and I've got a separate video all about that camera if you're interested. Measuring 78mm in diameter, 75mm long and weighing 346 grams, it's a lot more compact and light than the specs imply. There's a switch for manual or autofocus, followed by a fairly wide manual focusing ring that turns nice and smoothly, and at the end of the barrel a dedicated clicky RF control ring that can be customized. I appreciate having the separate RF control ring on a budget lens as well as that AF/MF switch because you don't always get it. At the end is a 67mm filter thread and the chance to mount an optional EF73B hood. As always, Canon only includes hoods with their most expensive L lenses, a strategy that still feels pretty mean compared to other companies. As a budget non-L Canon lens, it's also not weather sealed. Disappointing, but not surprising. Focusing is courtesy of an STM motor, and given the price and aperture, it's neither the fastest nor the quietest around. Here's a demo showing it in action, where you can also see the outer group physically moving back and forth within the barrel. I'll shut up now so you can have a listen. Now here's a focus demo behind the camera showing the fairly leisurely speed and the quite visible focus breathing. Now the lens does work with breathing compensation for video on compatible bodies, but optically it's certainly quite visible when shooting stills. In terms of the focusing noise in person, it is faintly audible, but it should be quiet enough to not be an issue when using most external mics. But if you are recording with the built-in microphones, then you might hear it in the quietest rooms. Now here's a demo for face tracking in video using the R6 Mark III and the lens wide open to 1.2 of course. You can see there's a minor delay as the lens catches up with me when I suddenly change distance, but if you mostly keep still or move at a constant speed it looks fine to me. You could also get an idea of the potential for shallow depth of field and bokeh quality here, along with the impact of focus breathing when presenting on video. Okay, now for some photo quality results, again from a pre-production sample, starting with a distant subject. In my final review, you're going to see my usual Brighton Pier composition, but for now it's the Canon office with the lens wide open at 1.2 and focused in the middle. Taking a closer look in the middle of the frame shows reasonably sharp details, but quite visible coloured fringing in areas of high contrast. I believe this is with the profile enabled in the camera, so you may need to do some work in post on RAW files to reduce this further. As I gradually close the aperture, you'll see the fringing decrease until it's essentially gone by about f2.8 onwards. And from this point on, the detail also gradually sharpens up, arguably peaking at around f5.6 in the middle. Note, I also measured a light transmission difference between 1.2 and 1.4, with the former definitely gathering more light, as you'd expect. Returning to the 1.2 sample and heading into the corners, you will see some softening of the detail on this particular composition and sample, although remember the image was focused in the middle of the frame and the roof in the corner of this picture is closer to the camera. But depth of field aside though, there are visible artifacts here, most likely some combination of coma and astigmatism. As I close the aperture down, these artifacts do slowly reduce, although to eliminate them in the corners, you'll need to stop down to around f8. Do remember though that this is just one composition with a pre-production lens and body, so it's just an early example. Interestingly, the lens and camera were already recognized by Adobe Camera Raw at the time that I made this video, so let's toggle the profile on and off in Adobe Camera Raw to see what the optics are actually giving you and what the profile is doing to correct it. Now the profile is correcting both barrel distortion and darkening in the corners. That is typical for profiles with modern lenses, and remember the 45 is designed to only be used with profiles applied. Note that ticking the remove chromatic aberration box here didn't make much difference to my samples, but it was possible to reduce it further using the separate defringe tools. Moving on to portraits, here's a shot taken at f1.2 on the R6 III using face and eye detection. Viewing the image as a whole, you can easily see how the background can be substantially blurred with the bright aperture, and the rendering style looks pretty well behaved here. So let's take a closer look where you'll see the details around my face in the middle of the frame are pretty sharp. Sure, not as razor sharp as the best lenses out there, but certainly more than sharp enough for a portrait. You'll also notice the fall off to blur by my ears at f1.2 from this distance, as well as some coloured fringing around the edge of my head. Once again, this could be reduced using defringe tools on RAW files. Meanwhile, the rendering still looks pretty good to me here, avoiding distracting busyness. And finally, a quick bokeh ball test with the lens shooting from its closest focusing distance of 45 cm. Here the lights in the background have been rendered into large bokeh blobs with the elongated cat's eye shape that you'll see from most bright aperture lenses. There's some outlining from the style of the bulbs, but the blobs do manage to avoid onion ringing textures within. As I close the aperture, you'll see the blobs take on more of a rounded shape, becoming mostly round by about f2. Meanwhile, the 9-bladed diaphragm system lends a geometric shape to the blobs, I'd say from around f2.8 onwards, but it's not too distracting. Okay, time for my verdict so far. Canon's RF 45mm 1.2 scratches the itch for anyone wanting standard coverage, but from a lens that offers something a bit different without breaking the bank. I personally prefer the slightly wider coverage of a 45 versus a traditional 50, and the bright 1.2 aperture will certainly tempt bokeh fiends at a way lower price than anything that Canon's offered to date. In terms of price, build and optics, it may slot between the entry-level 50 1.8 STM and the two high-end L50s, but is much closer to the budget lens. As such, don't expect miracles in terms of quality. Now, I've only tested a pre-production sample so far, but if my results are reflective of final models, you should expect to deal with coloured fringing and corner artifacts, especially wide open. Plus the focusing is fairly leisurely, and as a non-L lens, it's neither weather sealed nor comes with a hood. And yet, I reckon this could still become one of the best sellers in Canon's RF catalogue, delivering substantial blurring opportunities on portraits from a lens that is respectably priced and pretty compact too. I do also appreciate having an autofocus manual focus switch and separate focus and control rings versus say the 50 1.8 STM. Now, if you are into portraits and are more flexible on focal length and would prefer better corrected optics though, I'd suggest considering the RF 85 f2 at a similar price that also offers optical stabilization and 1:2 macro capabilities. But it is also almost double the focal length, so it's more about portrait coverage than having an all-round standard option. Alternatively, you could always adapt to used EF50 1.2L and enjoy that L build quality for only a little more money, although I do have to say that the optics on this older lens may not be as good as you'd hope. I will try to compare them side by side though, because I think it would be an interesting option. Ultimately, the RF 45 1.2 is a refreshingly unique lens. Canon's first 45 prime that's not either a specialty macro or a tilt shift model, and their first 1.2 aperture at this kind of price. It may not be optically stunning in my tests so far, but it does offer something genuinely different. And like the RF 16 2.8 before it, it's an exotic lens that I could only dream of owning when I started out in photography. And remember, this is now Canon's 4th standard prime in the RF system, so they do offer different options depending on your price range and quality expectations. It'd still be nice to have some full-frame third-party options too though, right? And that's it for this review so far. It's certainly early days with the lens, but hopefully you've got a flavour of what it can do here, and I will be following up with my usual in-depth test once I spend some decent time with a final production sample. So do make sure you're subbed with notifications so you don't miss out on that, or my final R6 III review, or indeed anything else, including a tasty comparison of Canon 85s that I'm working on right now. And in the meantime, if you're feeling thirsty and fancy a little boost, why not check out some of my cafe reviews on my Gordon Gets Coffee channel. Go on, have a look and see what you think. Thanks for watching, let me know what you think of the new lens in the comments, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.